And welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. And in today's special video podcast, we are going to discuss why I was very reluctant to change coaching methodologies 4 years ago. Yes, this is a video podcast. We're going to try something new for the next couple of weeks. Spotify sent me an interesting email saying that video podcasts have really taken off on their platform and it's getting lots of engagement, lots of views, and I should consider it. And I compared my Spotify viewership with my YouTube viewership for the podcast, because Spotify pushes my podcast onto YouTube podcasts, and my YouTube podcasts were getting more views than the Spotify. So that's why it's a little bit different. Let me know if you enjoyed the video or if you just prefer the audio in the comments, as always.
Welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast, your go-to resource for all things tennis coaching. Your host is Steve Whelan. Here, we dive deep into ecological dynamics and constraint-led coaching practices. Whether you're a seasoned coach or just starting out, this podcast is designed to build your confidence, expand your knowledge, and refine your techniques. Join me as we challenge traditional methods, explore player-centered approaches, and transform your coaching experience. Let's take your coaching game to the next level together. Stay tuned for insightful discussions and practical tips that will make a real difference on and off the court.
So yes, if you've ever heard my story before, I have been tennis coaching now for 24 years. About 4 years ago, I switched methodologies from a very traditional base coaching, basket feeding, technical heavy, lots of explicit instructions, coach-led, to a ecological approach where the player's in charge, very rarely basket feed, lots of constraint-led approach coaching. And if you watch some of my content, or you listen to my content, or you read my content, you'd think like when I started this approach, I just dove into it on day one and I changed how I coached. It was quite far from the truth, and it came about at quite a difficult time. And the day that I'm recording this, it's World Mental Health Day tomorrow. And I was in a bad place mentally with coaching. I was stressed, I was tired, suffering from anxiety, suffering from depression from coaching, because when you're a tennis coach, it's actually really difficult because there's a lot of pressure on you to get results, especially in the field of work where I sort of mainly coach, which is in the competitive environment. There's a lot of pressure on you, and I was burnt out. Coaching was tough. Every session was a drain. I couldn't work out why players weren't getting the results, because I was telling them what to do and when to do it, but they just couldn't follow those instructions. And if you listen to the podcast before, if you go back to a few episodes, you can hear more about why I changed. But at the start, I was quite reluctant, and I want to discuss why I was reluctant, because I think it's they are quite common barriers for tennis coaches. When they see a lot of my stuff, and a lot of coaches comment going, you know what, that makes perfect sense. I really like that idea. And then they'll give me reasons why they don't want to embrace it. And to be honest, they're the same reasons that I didn't want to embrace it 4 years ago. And I think the first one is the traditional way is all that I ever known. Like, all I'd ever known is basket feeding. Because when I started coaching, we did the hourglass, where we had a game assessment or a tie-break assessment, would pick a teaching point, would close the practice down to isolate that single teaching point. We'll do lots of repetition, lots of volume in that stage of the session. We'll open it up, we'll progress it, we'll put it back into a game at the end. And that's the way I was educated for years. And when you get told that that's not very effective, it's quite hard to take. I know at the start I was like, have I just wasted 20 years of coaching? Like, all I've ever known, like, I'm reading stuff where it's telling me the way I've been coaching is wrong and it's not very good, it's not very effective, because there's loads of sort of research in science to say that it's not very effective. And that was quite a hard pill to swallow. So when coaches challenge me now, I understand where they're coming from, because I challenge it as well. The difference is 4 or 5 years ago, there wasn't anyone talking about this in tennis. There wasn't anyone really talking about this in general on social media. And when I tried to find more information and find coaches who were using this approach, there was no one. Now, as I record this in 2024, there's lots of coaches using the constraint-led approach, and some very successful coaches using it as well. So it's a bit more in your face than it was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was no one. I couldn't find anything to do with tennis on this. And even other sports, a lot of the stuff was still either well hidden or I didn't quite know where to look. So it was quite hard to accept it at first. Secondly, the way I coach was successful. So I coached in that traditional manner with the basket feeding and the focus on technique. And players of mine have gone on to international professional tennis. A couple have played at Wimbledon. I'm not saying that's all down to me, but like I have that in the back of my mind going, well, it worked. It worked for player X, player B, or player C, or X, Y, and Z. Would make more sense there, wouldn't it? Like it worked for them. Like, why am I looking at this new methodology when I know it works? And I'll look at my peers in and around me, and I feel like I'm quite fortunate in many ways with the different roles that I do. I've got good friends who are national coaches. I've got good friends who work with professional players. And I look at some of the stuff they were doing, and they were getting success. But they were doing it the traditional way, the way that I was coaching, and they weren't doing this new methodology because no one else was. And that was a barrier as well, because I look at these national coaches and I'll go to regional or national camps, and a lot of the stuff that the coaches were doing were basket drilling and focusing on good technique and being efficient and effective, and the sort of hourglass type of coaching. And that was a barrier. I'm like, I'm not too sure, is this the right way? Obviously I'm reading this stuff and it's resonating with me because it's more about learning through playing the game and problem solving, decision making, and it resonated at the time because they were the struggles my players were going through. So the research I was reading at the time was saying, well, the traditional way doesn't transfer into a match because you're practicing it out of context, and when you put the player back into context and under pressure, it breaks down. It's not a transferable skill in those two situations. So it resonated to where I was at the time, so I was buying into it. But these things were holding me back. At the time, I was working at a club where I was a head coach. So I was trying out some of these new methods and new things. I was trying out like differential learning. I was trying out letting the player have control of the session and elements as well. And it was quite a nice environment because I was trying these things out and there was no one to question what I was doing because I was the head coach, I was the lead coach. So it's quite easy. Unfortunately, through business decisions, I left that position and I started a new position at a performance centre quite close by. And I went into there, and again, all the coaches in and around me, traditional based coaching. And that was tough because I'm like, do I really want to be pushing the boundaries here and trying out this new way of coaching when everyone else around me is doing something different? And at the time, I sort of 50-50'd it because I was still finding my way around constraint-led coaching. So if you look back 3 or 4 years on any of my posts or any of my videos, or even my first ever book, the Under 8 Constraining Tennis book, a lot of that is there's still elements of traditional coaching in there because I was scared of letting go what I previously known. I was scared of starting again and starting fresh. I was scared of tradition. I was scared of my peers in and around me. And I also was like, well, if this doesn't work, I'm going to look like a right idiot. And that held me back at the start. But I think, and this goes back to my podcast I did the other week with Matt Wiggum, I think as a new coach, this stuff's really scary. Because one, it's quite academic. So like when you get told about affordances, I had no clue what an affordance was, I reckon, up till this year. And I'm 3 years in. I was still struggling with affordances. I couldn't get my head around it. So I found that quite tough. I found some of the podcasts, like Rob Gray. I love Rob Gray's podcast. And now I listen to it in such a different mindset because I understand a lot of the stuff he's talking about. But when you first listen to Rob, you're so lost because it's so academic. It's quite scientific. And I found it really difficult. And I couldn't listen to Rob that much because I just got lost. And then in one episode, he interviewed Stuart Armstrong. And obviously Stuart resonated because he was English for first and foremost. And I thought, I'll try his podcast out. Because when Stuart spoke, it spoke much more like a coach, like a practitioner. Less of a researcher. And obviously Rob's a coach as well. but Stuart made it a bit more digestible. And when I found the talent equation, that's when I really started to embrace it a lot more, because Stuart made it a little bit easier to digest. But it is difficult when you first get into this, and it's part of the reason why I started my tennis coaching and the podcast and the YouTube channel, is to try and make these things a bit more digestible to coaches. And I've had lots of help along the way, like a shout out to Sean Malcolm as well, because Sean, who I know is down the rabbit hole a lot further than I am, doing a PhD in this. Like, he would sort of comment on some of my posts saying, I really like that part, but I don't think there's decision making in perception action. Because I did a post where I put like a step by step of what happens, and I put decision making in there. He goes, it doesn't really fit. So like, even, I mean, that was maybe 12 months ago, even less. Like, even then, I'm still finding my way around it. And it's difficult, because once you start going down it, it is a bit overwhelming. And I think any advice I'd have to any tennis coaches sort of starting out is, number one, don't worry. Everything that you've done previously isn't wasted. And I listened to a podcast, it might have been Stuart's Talent Equation podcast when he was interviewing the other week, or it might have been the Constraints Collective, and they were saying, no, you don't just get rid of everything that you've already known. You just build upon it and you change it. And it's not saying like traditional coaching is like almighty or like unbelievably bad. The issues with traditional coaching is it's so isolated, it's so unrepresentative, it doesn't look and feel like the game. All you have to do is change a few elements of your traditional practice and make it a bit more realistic, bit by bit, and slowly move your way up the scale, and you get more comfortable with it. And I think that's been my journey. I think when I started off, there was still very much elements of the traditional coach. Like, when I would constrain activities, it would be to get a technical outcome that I wanted the player to get. It wasn't for the player to find a movement solution as such. I wanted a technical element in my head of how I wanted the player to hit. So you still had things like quite long demonstrations. You still had me telling them ways of doing it and how to do it in those first maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years. But then over the last 2 years, when I've been more comfortable around the science, a bit more comfortable on the research and the terminology, I've started to really branch out. And I think most of my session now is very much almost the polar opposite how it was 4 years ago. But it just didn't happen overnight. And I think one thing I would say to tennis coaches, if you are thinking about embracing some of this methodology and looking at constraint-led approach, don't have to completely change everything. Don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You just got to start to understand of, okay, how can I make my practices more representative? And representative mean look like and feel like a proper tennis match. How can I make it where the players are making decisions, where there's problem solving? And I'm in the process of finishing a little online course called From Drills to Skills, from the practice court to the match court. It's an online course. There's 4 modules, and I just share some of the basic theory around constraints and what constraints are, what can we change in terms of constraints and manipulate, how I implement them into my practices. And a big part of the course is you also yourself have a go. And you go to your club and you have little tasks where you can try out some constraints within a practice that you already do. And you just see the difference. There's the option as well to film some of your practices and upload them into a community to share best practice with coaches, but also to share things when they go wrong and get some feedback from other coaches as well. And that's something that I've been working on to try and make this a bit more accessible. And it is overwhelming. And it's tough to be told that the methods that you've relied on for so many years maybe aren't the most effective and efficient. And I think I was having a conversation this week with a coach, and they were saying everyone has their own way of coaching. And it's true, everyone does have their own way, but there's more efficient and effective ways. And one of tennis' biggest problems is tradition. Tennis coaches have always coached in a traditional sense of basket drilling, technique first, little bit of tactics, coach-led. And I understand there's a pushback and a challenge when people see me online going, don't practice your serve in isolation. And they've done it for 20 years and they've had success, a bit like me. Oh, I don't know, you're talking rubbish. And then I always try and push back and say, well, if you think about it, if you've got two players, why would you only have the player serving into an empty service box? That makes no sense. If you've got two players, have a server and returner. It looks and feels a bit more like tennis. That's a really simple way in which you can massively improve your coaching just by putting a returner down there. Like, it doesn't cost you anything. It's not going to change anything. And coaches, again, just struggle with that because they've never done it before. And I struggled with it at the start. And there's videos even within my coach academy of me doing some isolated practices. And it's funny because I look back at some of those old videos from 2-3 years ago. And when I updated the website last year, I was going to take a lot of it down because to me it wasn't constraint-led coaching. It was like me pretending to be constraint-led approached because, again, I was still feeling my way around. But I left them up there because that's part of the journey. And I think you don't just change a player overnight, and you don't change as a coach overnight. And I think it's really important that you have this non-linear progression. And I put out on a podcast the other week, which is going to go out with Tom Littlewood and the Coaching Clubhouse podcast, when I was a guest on that. And I said, like, I've been doing this 4 years and I think I'm only still scratching the surface. Like, I'm only still starting to really feel comfortable with this way of coaching. And it's taken me 4 years. And the whole idea of mytenniscoaching.com and the My Tennis Coach Academy and this new course is, well, if it took me 4 years, but I can get you to this point in 6 months, like, that's going to make you such a better coach than me. And if you are interested in the From Drills to Skills course, I'll leave a link down below where you can register early access, for early access, and some discount as well. And it's going to be relatively cheap. 4 modules, coaching credits available as well for independent learning. It's not a qualification, it's a certification. You'll get certificates for each module you complete. And it's no assessment. It's just, and the tagline I'm using is no assessment, just development. Because the idea is it's going to be a peer-to-peer community group, and you get some support from me. You get some support from other coaches who are using this method. Like I said before, it wasn't around 4 years ago, but we've got a community now of over 60 coaches worldwide who are using this method, and we're sharing ideas. So if you are interested in joining, check out the link below in the show notes or the description. And yeah, so it wasn't all sort of just 1 minute I was traditional coach and next minute I was a ecological mindset coach. It's been a work in progress. It will continue to be a work in progress, and every day is a new day, and I'm learning new ways of constraining activities. I'm learning ways how not to constrain activities. I'm learning how to communicate effectively. I've learned how not to communicate with players. And if you are interested in this journey and you'd like some help and support, head over to mytenniscoaching.com. Check out the links below. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video podcast. If you have enjoyed the video rather than the audio, let me know, and I look forward to speaking to you next week on the My Tennis Coaching.
Thank you for tuning in to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more insightful discussions and valuable tips to enhancing your coaching journey. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at My Tennis Coaching for daily inspiration, coaching advice, and behind-the-scenes content. Stay connected, stay inspired, and keep pushing the boundaries of your coaching skills. Until next time, keep fostering growth, innovation, and excellence on and off the court. See you in the next episode.